This program was first presented to the Smith County Historical Society on May 6, 2008. The Lynching of Willis Jones, May 23, 1897. First, a definition of lynching. From the Handbook of Texas, lynching is the illegal killing of a person under the pretext of service to justice, race, or tradition. Though it often refers to hanging, the word became a generic term for any form of execution without due process of law. Lynchings are certainly not unknown in Tyler history. During the Civil War, Van Zandt County citizens seized 4 white men from the Tyler jail and hung 3 of them, supposedly on what is now Confederate Street. Also, during the war, 1 black slave was burned alive on the square. In 1867, a group of Federal soldiers took a local white man, Hut Murray, from the jail, tortured, then murdered him. After about 1885, there was a large increase in lynching across the South, including Texas. In Tyler, in 1895, another black man, Henry Hilliard, was burned alive on the square. This story of Willis Jones, a white man, occurs just a year and a half after that. On May 18, 1897, a Tuesday night, about good dark, Riley Stewart, age 63, a prominent farmer who had lived in Smith County for over 35 years, an ex-county commissioner, an exemplary Christian of unimpeachable integrity, was at home in Lindale. A black man came to the gate and called Stewart out. In a short time, Stewart returned and told his wife that Joe Ogburn, a local merchant, wanted to see him at the store about some fruit boxes. He left, and at about 9:30 p.m., several persons heading home from a prayer meeting found him on the ground near the road in 300 yards from the church, having been struck twice on the head. He was unable to make a statement and died the next morning. Later that night, when the INGN train pulled in heading north, a black man by the name of Effie Jones called for a ticket to Mineola and was arrested and held on suspicion. Later testimony revealed that he was kept at the home of a Mr. Dunaway at Lindale for the rest of the night. He was awakened about dawn the next morning and informed that he was to be taken to Tyler. Instead, he was taken out to the horse lot and hung up twice. The last time he was swung up, he lost consciousness, eventually awakening to find that he was being held up by someone standing at his back, and it was getting good light. The rope was taken from around his neck, and other white men began to arrive. They took charge of him and carried him off into a bottom and kept him there until about 11 o'clock. While there, they repeatedly asked him to tell the truth about the killing because a crowd was coming on behind, and if he did not state the facts, they could not guarantee that he would see the sun go down. The men told him they knew that he had been led to do the killing by a certain party, and that while they did not call any names, he knew that they meant Willis or Will Jones, his employer. After being in the woods for some time, he made the desired statement. They took him back to Lindale, and that afternoon took him on to Tyler in a hack. A telegram was then sent to Willis Jones, age 39, at Mineola. Jones was actually a relative of the murdered man, a first cousin of Mrs. Riley Stewart, who is a member of the large Copeland family in northwest Smith County. Jones came across country to Lindale and went to the home where Stewart's body was lying. When he saw the body, he became visibly affected and swore eternal vengeance on the man who killed his cousin's husband. Instead, he was himself arrested, taken to Tyler, and put in the jail, the building which is now Randy Gilbert's law office, just east of the square on Irwin. What was the supposed motive? About 10 years before, Mrs. Eliza Austin Copeland, Riley Stewart's mother-in-law, had taken out a $10,000 policy on Stewart's life, made payable to her. After her death, Willis Jones and Simon Munzesheimer of Mineola entered into written agreement with Stewart that his son John should keep up $2,000 of the policy, and they would keep up $7,000 and Mrs. Stewart $1,000, and at the death of Riley Stewart, Jones and Munzesheimer were to pay all expenses of burial. Later, Munzesheimer sold his interest in the $7,000 benefit to Willis Jones. The murder was allegedly for that $7,000 in insurance money, which was not a small amount in 1897. In Tyler, a crowd of 200 surrounded the jail, eager to get a glimpse of the accused men. Effie Jones, the alleged hitman, was pressured to make an official confession. Law officials told him that he knew all about the murder and had not stated the truth, and that unless he made a statement, they could not promise him that he would ever get into a cell. If he told them about it, they would protect him, but if he refused, they did not know whether they could do so or not. Remember, just a year and a half before, a black man had been burned alive on the square. Someone sent him a pint of whiskey. He drank part of it, and someone who seemed to live up near Lindale told him that he was going to go back and tell the boys that he would not make a statement. He said, "Wait, boss, and I will tell you all about it." He drank more of the whiskey and stated that Willis Jones had forced him to kill Wiley Stewart. Effie Jones was placed in a cell on the bottom floor of the jail, while Willis Jones was placed in a second-floor cell with Dr. R.H. Warren, who had been accused of rape. The day after the arrest, the 20th, Thursday the 20th, Stewart's funeral was held at his home in Lindale with full Masonic honors by both the Mineola and the Mount Sylvan lodges. It was largely attended. He was buried in Carmel Cemetery west of town, and his stone is one of the largest in that very old cemetery. The Dallas Morning News reporter interviewed J.A. Thedford and Jesse Oden, who said, "The feeling at Lindale was very intense, but that cooler judgment had prevailed and the law would be allowed to take its course." However, by Saturday, May 22nd, it was being talked around both Lindale and Tyler that Willis Jones would be lynched. The sheriff's department was so concerned about mob violence that they removed their pack of bloodhounds, usually kept in the jail yard, so that the dogs would not be harmed. That night, the jail was locked as usual, and no extra guard was placed around it. About midnight, a body of 200 armed men from Lindale rode into Tyler. Down the Lindale Road, which was basically US 69, cutting across the corner of what is now Glenwood and Gentry, picking up at North Gaston, past the Patterson House, and on down West Oakwood past the cemetery. A bystander, a boy at the time, remembered that they rode into the square 4 abreast, with shotguns on the horns of their saddles in front of them. They also brought with them a wagon with sledgehammers, cold chisels, and other heavy tools. None wore masks. They went up Ferguson to College and down Irwin to the hitching racks on the east side of the courthouse. They hitched their horses there, just a block from the jail, and left a guard over them. They then proceeded to the jail, which is the 2-story building to the middle left of the photo, and threw a picket line around the premises, allowing no one to pass it. A freight train came along, and that track is still there, but as the deadline passed the track, it was not allowed to pass. A deadline was also placed immediately east of the jail. The mob demanded that the sheriff and his deputies turn over the keys, but they refused. Sledgehammers, steel chisels, and other heavy instruments were brought out from the crowd. The mob then seized and disarmed the officers. Sheriff John P. Smith tried in vain to get the crowd to disperse, and when that failed, Judge J. Gordon Russell, who had just arrived on the scene in a hack, made a speech appealing for peace and order and asked the crowd to disperse and allow the law to take its course. He was given a respectful hearing, but his remarks were not heeded. Then the work of battering down the great iron door of the lower corridor began. Judge Russell again made an impassioned appeal, begging that the good name of Tyler in Smith County not be besmirched. He promised them that the courts would give justice, but the crowd refused to listen. It took 35 minutes to break open the jail's lower door. The crowd quickly climbed to the head of the iron stairway to the second floor, where they started battering down the riveted double steel doors. This was very difficult, taking 40 minutes of hard labor to break them in. Dr. Warren, Willis Jones's cellmate, later gave an account of what happened in the jail. I was awake when the mob arrived and began to batter down the lower doors. Jones was sound asleep by my side. We had both undressed and laid in the bunk at the same time. After I had heard the first few blows on the door, I was satisfied it was a mob, and I called to Jones to wake up. He was sleeping very soundly. After calling him several times and failing to wake him, I took him by the shoulders and shook him. He sat up, and I told him to listen to the hammering. I said, "It's a mob, Will, and they are after you." "Yes," he said, "I believe it is. They will take me out and hang me. It looks like the officers ought to be able to protect me." I told him no, that they could never get him out of the cage in a month. This is a similar cage currently outside the old jail. If they killed him, they would have to shoot him. All this time we could hear the hammering beating on the doors. Jones appeared perfectly cool and listened intently to the noise of the hammering. "I shall ask them not to hurt you, doctor," he said, and then he listened again to the hammering. Then he asked, "What would you do if you were me?" I hesitated for a moment. My first impulse was to encourage him in the hope that he would not be killed, but I felt that it was certain, so I told him I would try to prepare myself for death. "Yes," he said, "that is best. Pray for me, doctor." I told him I could not do that I was in no condition to pray, and for him to pray for himself. Then he said, "If there is such a thing as heaven, I wish now I had been a Christian. I hope God will forgive me for my little sins. I was never guilty of this one." The mob was then hammering on the last door. He hung his feet over the side of the bed and said, "I believe I will get up and dress," and he put on his socks and pants. "It is not worthwhile to put on my shoes, I don't suppose," he said, and then he laid down on his back with his hands under his head. "You must look out, doctor, if they shoot in here," he said. "I hope they won't hurt you." When the mob broke the door open, they walked around to the rear of the cells and came along toward us. Jones sat up and drew his knees up to his breast, and folding his arms over them, watched the mob approach. They had turned on the incandescent lights from downstairs, and one was hanging in the runway just outside of our cell. The mob came along, peering into each cell, and passed by ours, and the leader, looking into the next cell, saw a man lying down. "Here he is," he exclaimed. The man sprung up and said, "No, I am not Will Jones." "Here I am, if it is Will Jones you want," said Jones. Then the mob came back and ranged themselves into a semicircle in the runway. Jones seemed to recognize one of the men and said, "John, you are going to kill an innocent man." And that John was probably John Stewart, the murdered man's son, and Willis's second cousin. "We have all the evidence we want, Will," replied the man, and then the shooting began. The first shots fired came from the right end of the semicircle as I faced them, and the weapon was a rifle of the Winchester pattern. The first shot struck Jones in the right breast and passed entirely through his body and just barked my shins. When I saw the shooting was going to begin, I sat on the far side of the bed from the mob, facing Jones, and my leg was lying on the bed by him. When that shot was fired, I took it down without being told to. Jones gave a tremendous flounce and groaned. The second struck him nearly in the same place, and he screamed. I was looking right at him, and I could see his shirt push in when the bullet struck him and puff out on the other side when they came out. Then 2 pistols were poked through the bars. I called to the men to put the muzzles clear through the bars, that I did not want to be hit by any glancing shots. The pistol next to the Winchester was first to fire, and the one to my left fired the last 3 shots. The first shot from the Winchester killed Jones, and I don't think he knew anything after that. I don't think I was ever more calm in my life than I was while the mob was breaking into the jail and while the shooting was going on. But after it was all over and they were holding the inquest over the body of Jones, the reaction came on and I was almost prostrated with nervousness. I never want to go through such an experience again. If you will think about the situation, you will see I had cause to be nervous. I was there, locked up in a steel cage about 6 feet square, with not the least protection in the world against bullets, with a mob of men shooting at another man and the bullets passing clear through him and glancing around in the cell. I do not think I could identify any of the men that did the shooting. It was late at night, and there was only one light near us, and after the first shot was fired, the cell was full of smoke. I could not say for sure that I could identify any of them. After accomplishing their purpose, the men filed downstairs and out of the building, leaving Effie Jones, the man actually accused of the murder, unhurt, even though they knew he was on the first floor. The crowd quietly marched back to their horses, mounted, and rode back out of town toward Lindale. The officers quickly sent runners for the coroner, and at the inquest, an hour later, Dr. Warren testified to the facts of the killing, and a verdict was rendered. 12 shots had entered Jones. Later that day, his body was shipped back to his home in Wood County for internment. On Monday, May 24th, just shy of 1 week from the original murder, he was buried in the Mineola Cemetery. He left 4 sisters, all of whom were wives of prominent men in Mineola and other towns in Texas. When the Dallas Morning News reporter saw Judge Russell the next morning, he condemned the killing at the jail in the strongest terms and said that every effort would be made to bring the perpetrators to justice. He thought it was a most unfortunate affair that had marred the good name of Tyler in Smith County. The fact that the crowd had left Effie Jones unhurt, allowing his trial to come up at the next term of the court, was also a subject of discussion around town. Judge John M. Duncan issued a statement on Monday morning, starting by citing sections of both the U.S. and state constitutions that provided for trial by jury and the protection of the accused, who was to be presumed innocent by officers of the law. He wrote, "Was Will Jones guilty? God knows, and God alone. Many believe him guilty, others that he was not. He knew, but he is dead, and had no chance to establish his innocence." Judge Duncan wondered, since a lynch mob was anticipated, why didn't the sheriff move him out of the county? Why wasn't the jail defended better? A few well-armed men at the top of the narrow stairs could have prevented them from getting to the accused. Duncan wrote, "Much complaint is made that the criminal laws and their administration are not perfect, that murderers and other criminals, in due process of law, go free. No human institution is perfect or can be. If justice has failed in Smith County through the administration of law, the fault lies with the jury. If the mob has administered justice in Smith County, it is because it was composed of the mass of men from whom the juries are selected. By which mode, then, is justice more likely to be administered? If by the mob, let us abolish the law. If by the law, let us abolish the mob." The Tyler Pastors Conference that afternoon passed resolutions condemning the lynching, but added, "We believe the tardiness of the courts of the land is not properly punishing murderers has much to do with creating the sentiment that makes mob violence possible, and it may be that this tardiness has been brought about by a lack of moral sentiment in sustaining the courts and enforcing the law." News of the lynching traveled quickly. It was reported in newspapers from New York to Idaho. Governor Culberson denounced it as a blot on civilization. State officials predicted that it would have the effect of making the governor recommend to the special session the passage of a law that would prosecute lynchers. He did so less than a month later, and the bill passed. That Thursday, B.B. Hart and D.R. Kootman of Mineola, brothers-in-law of Will Jones, traveled to Tyler. They told the Dallas Morning News reporter that, "We came down last night to employ counsel to prosecute the murderers of Will Jones. After a careful and thorough investigation of the whole matter at Mineola, Lindale, and Tyler, we concluded that Will Jones is wholly innocent of the murder of Riley Stewart, and that the alleged statement made by the Negro, if made, was extorted and was made for the purpose of saving himself from the parties who had him in the woods. On reaching Tyler yesterday evening, we were astonished to see in a local paper that we were convinced of the guilt of Will Jones. On last Tuesday evening, we had a conversation with the Negro, Effie Jones, in the Smith County Jail. The statement then made by the Negro was so contradictory and impossible that it only confirmed us in our opinion that Will Jones has been made the victim of a foul conspiracy. We learned that it has been stated that Jones had a motive in causing the death of Riley Stewart because he was carrying insurance on his Stewart's life. The amount of this insurance, as shown by the policies, is $4,000 and not $8,000, as has been stated in the press. We are unable at present to state the amount of insurance carried on his life by his wife and his son, John Stewart. The cost of this insurance to Jones was only $156 annually. There was no motive for him to have Riley Stewart murdered because it was well known that he was liberal and cared little for money. He was young and without a family. Upon investigation of his affairs, we find he had $1,000 in the bank, besides many good notes from money loaned to various parties and other good property. It is also a well-known fact that the warmest affection existed between Will Jones and Riley Stewart and his Stewart's wife. These facts certainly refute the report that he was in straitened financial circumstances and was unable to pay the premium on the policy. In fact, the last premium was paid about 30 days prior to the killing of Stewart. Among other evidence that we are prepared to show is that the leaders of the mob which murdered Will Jones were his personal enemies and have been on bad terms with Riley Stewart for the past 7 years. We hope that the public will reserve its opinion until the true facts can be made known. We cannot, after a most thorough investigation, find a single fact that would incriminate Will Jones, unless it be the circumstance of his having this insurance and the alleged statement of the Negro. On Saturday, May 29th, 1 week after the lynching, Sheriff John P. Smith broke his silence in a lengthy article in answer to charges made by Judge Duncan publicly and others privately that he did not take the proper steps to prevent the lynching of Will Jones. He said the rumors of the intent to lynch were not so great as on previous occasions when prisoners were brought to jail in Tyler on charges of a serious nature. That when the citizens of Lindale arrested Effie Jones, the Negro, they checked and frowned down all efforts to lynch him, and that he thought this same spirit would prevent the lynching of Will Jones. The sheriff said he did not remove the prisoner on Thursday or Friday for the reason that the examining trial had been set for Saturday morning, and the prisoner had to be present at the trial. Saturday, that part of the jail where Jones was located was locked, and the keys placed in a vault in this city, the combination to which was known only to one man, the sheriff. The sheriff further stated that the Smith County Jail was one of the best in the state, and he honestly believed its strength and endurance would successfully resist the assaults of any mob, however large it might be, unless explosives were used. He did not believe the mob would resort to explosives, but later learned that they came prepared to blow up the jail in case of failure to obtain entrance in any other way. After explaining his actions and the motives which prompted them, Sheriff Smith turned to Judge Duncan's published statement. Judge Duncan seems to go into hysterics over the fact that a man was lynched in Tyler and Smith County, and I want to say right here that no man deplores more than I the spirit of mob law, and no man can truthfully say that I have ever failed to oppose with all the powers and force at my command any and all efforts at mob violence. No one knows this better than Judge Duncan. He expressed love for home, country, state, and state institutions, and says this affection forced him to rise up in meeting and make his speech. The judge's memory seems strangely deficient. Let me recall to his mind the wild and memorable scenes that occurred in this county and in the public square of Tyler on October 28, 1895. And is the judge's memory so deficient that he forgets that at a mock trial at which Henry Hilliard was arraigned, tried, and convicted, Judge Duncan was the ruling spirit? The pseudo-officer in charge, the judge, and prosecuting attorney all combined into one great official head of that weird scene? And yet the judge quotes that portion of the national and state constitutions which says that the right of trial by jury shall remain inviolate, that no person shall be held for a capital or otherwise infamous offense except upon presentment of a grand jury. Why did not Judge Duncan write his speech on the day succeeding that on which Henry Hilliard was slowly roasted to death? Seems to me that it would have been just a little more appropriate then than now, but Henry Hilliard is dead, burned to death slowly and by tortuous degrees on the public square of the city of Tyler on the afternoon of October 28, 1895. In justice to Judge Duncan, I desire to say that I do not believe he approved of the burning of Hilliard, though it is generally accepted that he did approve of his being hanged there, then and there. And if I remember correctly, it was only last Thursday afternoon that the judge told me out of his own mouth that he wished the mob had hanged instead of burned Hilliard, or words to that effect. Sheriff Smith continued, why was not the jail defended? In the first place, with 4 exceptions, there was not the slightest inclination evidenced by the people of this city during the currency of the mob rumors to come and assist me in upholding the majesty and dignity of the law and protecting the prisoner. Not a single man that I talked to would consent to go inside the jail and help defend it. Now, in the light of these facts, what could I do? Besides myself, I had 3 deputies. We could have gone into the jail, of course, and sat there and waited for the mob to break in the door, and then we 4 could have engaged in a hand-to-hand struggle with 75 or 100 men, the most determined and wrought-up men I ever saw. Of course, we could have done this, but, and I ventured the assertion right here, that not 1 out of 100 of those men who lounged around on the streets and condemned my action would have gone with me into that jail. And in this proposition, I include my good friend, Judge Duncan. Almost 2 weeks later, on Thursday, June 10th, Sheriff Smith filed affidavits before District Attorney Stuart Smith in Justice Paulson's court, charging 11 prominent citizens of Lindale and vicinity with the murder of Will Jones in his cell in the Smith County Jail. They included P.M. Harpole, tax collector of Smith County, Dr. H.L. Tate, former state representative, John Stewart, son of Riley Stewart, James Vickery, a deputy sheriff at the time of the lynching but who had since been fired, S.S. Lyons, twice a candidate for Smith County Sheriff, John Maxwell, John Bailey, Tom Oden, Henderson Tucker, T.E. Sykes, and C.H. Latham. Sheriff Smith informed the Dallas Morning News reporter that the arrest would be made as quickly as possible. The reporter also met District Attorney Smith, who told him, I am so intensely impressed that the law should be upheld in this case that I shall spare no alertment, no means of detection, and no degree of aggressive caution in presenting to the bar of justice this infraction of the law of the land. That night, a delegation of Lindale people was in Tyler, brought in by the news that the prosecution process had begun. The Tyler paper on Friday ran the resolutions passed by a meeting at Hopewell between Tyler and Lindale. Resolved that we, the citizens of Hopewell and Swan, in committee, endorse the action of our Sheriff, John P. Smith, in not making a forcible resistance to the so-called mob that lynched Will Jones recently in the jail at Tyler, Texas. Feeling as we do that if resistance had been made, it would have resulted in the death of many of our best citizens, including perhaps the sheriff and his deputies, which would have been a great price to pay for the protection of a man whom we believe to be guilty beyond all doubt of a crime that was as heinous as it is possible for the mind of man to conceive. Resolved further that we appeal to our lawmakers to so change our laws and jury system that when a terrible crime is committed, that the guilty party be forced to a speedy trial, convicted and punished as he may justly deserve, thereby removing the cause of the citizens of our country taking the law in their own hands and executing criminals as is being done all over the United States. Signed, T.E. Perdue, Secretary of Meeting. On Saturday morning, June 12th, the 11 citizens of Lindale, against whom the affidavits for murder had been made and warrants for their arrest issued, rode into Tyler, escorted by some 700 people from Lindale and vicinity, who were eager to lend assistance in the way of making bond for their fellow townsmen in trouble. The accused men stationed themselves in the courthouse yard, expecting to have their examining trial as promised. However, the warrants issued the Thursday before had not been served on them. The attorneys for the state and defense held a consultation and agreed to reset the case for the following Wednesday. Morgan Duke, counsel for the defense, stated to the Dallas Morning News reporter that he had a special understanding with a district attorney that his client should not be served with the warrants but would be allowed to go free on their promised return Wednesday. D.A. Stuart Smith told the Dallas Morning News reporter that evening that nothing would be left undone by him to bring the participants in this crime, whomever they might be, to justice, and that as a sworn officer of the law, he would advocate the refusal of bail to all engaged where the evidence was conclusive enough to justify such action. However, it was generally talked among the citizens of Tyler and Smith County that if the accused men were not given bail, they would be liberated by a popular uprising of the citizens. Furthermore, a large number of the citizens of Lindale were indignant at the whole idea of prosecution. They said that if the case was prosecuted to the finish, a demand would be made for the prosecution of all who took part in the execution of Henry Hilliard, the black man who had been burned at the stake in downtown Tyler a year and a half before. And if that happened, a large number of the most prominent people of East Texas would be involved. While a majority of citizens of Tyler condemned the killing of Jones, there was also a large part who either upheld the mob or said nothing against it. The Dallas Morning News urged a change of venue for the case. These prosecutions will attract attention throughout Texas because the law-abiding people are anxious to know if the crime of lynching can be punished in this state. There are some people who believe the trial will be a mere formality and that relatives and friends of the accused will sit on the jury. The news does not share this feeling, but believes that there will be a just trial and a vigorous prosecution. At any rate, this trial will be watched with the keenest interest. 2 days later, early on Monday morning, affidavits were filed in the Lindale precinct against 22 people of that area, including the 11 charged in Tyler with the lynching of Willis Jones. The constable from the Lindale precinct was in Tyler at 8 o'clock that morning, subpoenaing witnesses in the cases. A large crowd of Tyler people left on the morning train to appear against the accused. District Attorney Stuart Smith was also notified of the prosecutions being instituted at 11 o'clock that morning and refused to go. He wrote to Justice of the Peace R.C. King at Lindale, "I am compelled in view of the circumstances to regard this step as a strategy on the part of the accused and their friends, resorted to for the purpose of eluding the anticipated decision of Justice Paulson. The 11 men charged in his court must answer here, and any action that may be had in your court will not affect the course of the proceedings already begun in Precinct Number 1, and therefore it is not necessary for me to appear on their account. If the party filing affidavits against the other 11 is acting in good faith, desiring alone that these men be brought to justice, he can have no objection to filing them in this court, where they can take the same course as others at a place already designated as the base of action by the state, and thereby remove the trial from the local passions and excitement that would surround it at Lyndale, in an atmosphere certainly friendly enough to the accused here, and therefore I respectfully decline to appear on their account. At the request of the defendants, I readily agreed to set Wednesday as the day for their trial here in order to give them ample opportunity to perfect arrangements and prepare their defense, desiring to be as courteous and lenient as my duty would allow. I understand from Constable Day that he has yielded far enough to extend to the accused the privilege of going without bail on the promise that they would appear here Wednesday. Wednesday is the day set for trial, and the officer charged with the service of the warrants will have to answer for their due execution. On receipt of the letter, Justice King in Lyndale appointed William Goodman of Tyler to represent the state. King telegraphed the district attorney of his appointment and received a message in reply not to act. The justice, however, insisted on his action, and the cases went to trial in Lyndale that day. Remember, the lynching happened in Tyler. William Goodman told the Dallas Morning News, "When I arrived there, I found the 22 men arrested on warrants borne out by Dunaway in the second story of the courthouse guarded by armed men. The case was called for trial, and Justice of the Peace King appointed me as counsel for the state, as the district attorney did not come. The case opened. I made a motion for a change of venue because of the feeling in the neighborhood in favor of the defendants. This was promptly overruled, and the spectators applauded the ruling. Counsel Beard for the defense asked the spectators not to make any other such demonstrations. I next made a motion to strike from the docket the names of the 11 men for whom warrants had been issued in Tyler precinct on the 16th. This was overruled. I next moved to postpone the case until the state could secure a more important witness in the person of Sheriff J.P. Smith, who was at that time in Marlin, Texas. I stated to the court that I expected to be able to identify a large number of defendants as being members of the mob by Sheriff Smith. This was overruled. The state then announced, ready for trial. The witnesses examined identified several of the original 11 defendants as having been in the jail at the time of the lynching. Parties were also identified as having stood on the deadline formed around the jail and having told people to stand back. The man who disarmed Deputy Sheriff Smith was positively identified in the person of ISS Lyons. When Deputy Sheriff Smith walked up to the deadline, the men stopped him and demanded his arms, and Lyons took his pistol away from him. We could not positively identify who did the shooting. The men we secured the best evidence against were Bud Lyons, Dr. H.L. Tate, J.W. Osborne, Jim Vickery, E.W. Maxwell, and Tom Boyd. Notice that John Stewart's name is not included. Justice King bound them over in the sum of $1,000 each to await the action of the grand jury, which convenes here in September next. That concluded the trial. There was no stenographer present and no written testimony. Constable Day of the Tyler precinct went to Lyndale and notified the original 11 that they would be expected to appear in the Tyler court in 2 days on Wednesday as originally planned. They promised him that they would be on hand, and they were. After their arrival, they accepted service on the warrants issued and went into custody of Constable Day. At 10:30 a.m., District Attorney Smith arrived from Austin, where he conferred with the governor, and a few minutes later the case was called for examination. A good-sized crowd had collected around the courthouse, and the courtroom was packed to suffocation. Fortunately, the attendance from the Lyndale precinct was not as large as it had been on Saturday. and while the interest was intense, it was not nearly as feverish as it had been then. Duke and Beard appeared as counsel for the defense and presented a motion to dismiss, which set forth that the men arrested this morning on warrants issued on the 10th had in the meantime been arrested in the Lindale precinct on warrants sworn out by Constable J.W. Dunaway of that precinct on the 14th. The men had stood their preliminary trial before Justice of the Peace King on the same day and had been bound over in $1,000 bond each. The defense attorneys claimed that, as the warrants issued in the Tyler precinct had been returned to the court, that the court had never actually obtained jurisdiction over the men, even though they appeared in Tyler on Saturday the 12th when they heard the warrants had been issued. District Attorney Smith, for the prosecution, stated that according to Texas law, when a justice of the peace began a preliminary trial, it was his office to carry it out, and that the action of no other court could affect it while pending. When Justice Paulson cleared his throat to give his decision, there was a dead silence over the perspiring audience. He said, "Gentlemen, my decision in this case is that this court has no jurisdiction. The motion to dismiss is sustained." In an interview with District Attorney Smith after the examining trial, he said, "When I was in Austin yesterday, I saw Governor Culberson in regard to this matter, and in his conversation with me, he said he favored a vigorous prosecution and told me he would send militia here to preserve order. It was my opinion, and is now, that such a demonstration of an armed force from the outside would so arouse the spirit of the people of Smith County that it would be impossible to secure an indictment from the grand jury in this county. Until these men are indicted by a grand jury, the thing must stand as it is. If the regular grand jury fails to return bills of indictment, I shall ask for a special jury commissioner to select a special grand jury to investigate this case. If this fails, I shall continue to bring it before every term of the grand jury until something is done." When asked why he removed the case to Lindale with such haste, Attorney Duke said, "On June 10, 1897, complaints were filed against 11 men, all prominent citizens of the town of Lindale, Texas, charging them with the murder of Will Jones in the Tyler jail. At the time, I was in Point, Rains County, and was at once notified to come home. I reached home Saturday morning and found the accused parties had come to Tyler to stand their examining trial. I also found the general report was that Judge Paulson would not grant the parties bail, regardless of the testimony, unless District Attorney Smith would agree to it. On the protest of the accused parties, I, with my co-counsel, Jesse F. Oden of Lindale, agreed with District Attorney Smith to postpone the examining trial until Wednesday, the 16th of June. This being done, I, Hoas, S.A. Lindsay, and B.B. Beard fell upon the course since adopted and went to Lindale Sunday night and held a conference with our co-counsel, Jesse F. Oden, and we concluded to have complaints filed in the Justice Court of the precinct where the defendants resided and where all felt that they could get a fair and impartial trial, provided we could get someone to make the complaints, which was done. And you see the result of the trial and disposition of the matter. Lindale is one of the best communities in Smith County and is composed of as good citizens as can be found anywhere. After that, things quieted down considerably, and the knots of men with their heads together in close communion, a feature of the streets for the past week, disappeared, and things were fast assuming their normal state. The Dallas Morning News editorialized, "What the grand jury will do cannot be prophesied, but it is known that the jury commissioners who called the grand jury for the September term at the close of their session in February were largely from the northern part of the county, naturally knew more men there, and would be more apt to have drawn their grand jurors from that section. No one but the jury commissioners know who will be on the grand jury, but if these surnames prove correct, it will come from a section for the people are largely in sympathy with the men accused. The Lindale neighborhood is one of the most prosperous and thickly populated in Smith County. Most of the inhabitants have lived there for years, and many have grown up and so married and intermarried until that part of the county can almost be classed one vast family. I have not run down where all of the fall 1897 grand jury members live, but when the grand jury convened, the 11 accused lynchers were not indicted for anything, and I could find no evidence of any follow-up special grand juries. That part of the story was over. We have left one person behind, and that is Effie Jones, the man actually accused of the murder of Riley Stewart. Supposedly, he was not lynched because the mob knew he had no money to hire a high-priced attorney to get himself off, while Willis Jones and his family did. Effie Jones remained in jail until October 10th, when the court took 2 days to convict him of murder in the first degree and sentence him to death. The next day, Judge Russell set aside the conviction. It seems that Effie Jones had been defended by Morgan Duke, the same attorney the accused lynchers had used before the Lindale J.P. court this previous year. Duke was shocked to learn the written confession made by Effie Jones while he was in jail and shortly after the murder had been obtained by coercion and intimidation. And while under great fright and fear, otherwise, of course he would have objected to it during the trial. Judge Russell, having heard a lot of criticism of how Duke defended Jones, appointed a committee of the top local judges and attorneys to look into the matter. Judge John M. Duncan, Judge J.W. Fitzgerald, Judge H.G. Robertson, and attorneys B.B. Kane and A.G. McElwain. A large number of witnesses, including Effie Jones and several citizens of Lindale, were brought before the committee and examined. In the meantime, Morgan Duke asked to withdraw from the case, which was granted, and James Wiley was then appointed to represent Jones. Wiley filed an amended motion for a new trial, setting up as additional grounds as to why that should be granted. Evidently, some sort of understanding existed between Duke, who had been attorney for Effie Jones, and the friends of Riley Stewart and the accused lynchers, by which Duke was to protect the interests of the mob while appearing to represent Effie Jones. It was important in the trial of Effie Jones to develop the facts so as to vindicate the Lindale people, so that all the facts coming out, it would vindicate the parties who were implicated in the killing of Will Jones. Effie had been convinced that if he maintained his confession and while on the stand went light on those who had terrorized him into making the confession, then it would go far in at least preventing him from getting the death penalty. Of course, it did not. After reading the report and hearing the motion for a new trial, Judge Russell, in passing upon the motion, made the following comments. Right after this trial, it was circulated that the defendant, in effect, had been ambushed by his own lawyer, and I could not, in justice to myself, permit the charge to go unchallenged and uninvestigated. In addition to the other charges, jurors were seated who shouldn't have been, and hearsay evidence went unchallenged. Duke, Effie Jones's attorney, had complained in a private letter that he should have been employed by the Stewart heirs to reclaim the insurance money, and it was advised to work with the district attorney for conviction. Judge Russell concluded, I believe that the law means something when it says that every person charged with crime shall have a fair and impartial trial. In this case, it does not occur to me that the defendant has had that, and so far as I am concerned, I intend to insist that whenever any man is sent to the scaffold or to the penitentiary from any court in this district, he shall go there with all the constitutional and legal guarantees the law gives him. Effie Jones's case was then sent to Gregg County on a change of venue. He was tried again in April 1898, found guilty again, but this time sentenced only to life in prison. Unfortunately, those court records have not survived. I did check with the state archives and found that Effie Jones first went to the state penitentiary in Rusk, where the mental hospital is now. He worked on the Texas State Railroad, then was sent to Harlem, now Jester Prison Farm in Fort Bend County. After the deaths of 8 prisoners there in 1913, in an investigation into prison farm abuse, Governor Colquitt issued Jones and others conditional pardons in 1914. Effie Jones was released after 16 years, 5 months in prison. I was unable to track him down after that. He probably went totally off-grid. What happened to the insurance money, the alleged motive for the original murder? Since Willis Jones was never brought to trial, he was never found guilty. The insurance money became part of his estate and went to his sisters. I think that a sizable portion of the money must have gone into his tombstone. It includes his portrait carved in bas-relief and is one of the most attractive in Mineola Cemetery. The inscription at the base reads, "Can we forget the agonizing hour when those loved eyes were closed to wake no more?" Well, whatever happened to those lynchers? S.S. Lyons, who had twice been a candidate for sheriff before the lynching, was later elected sheriff of Smith County in 1904. John Stewart, the murdered man's son, became a constable. Tom Oden and H.L. Tate remained highly esteemed members of Lindale Society. Finally, what happened to Tyler? Did we learn anything from the 1897 lynching of Willis Jones? 8 years later, on May 1st, 1909, a large crowd of Tyler citizens watched as Jay Hodges, a black man, was hung from a derrick at the construction site of the new county courthouse in the center of town. He had been accused of sexual assault. This notice appeared front and center in the Tyler newspaper. Congratulations from Lindale. Citizens of Tyler, we, the citizens of Lindale and community in mass meeting assemble, want to congratulate and commend the citizens of Tyler and community for the prompt action taken in meting out justice to the brute committing crime 2 miles east of Tyler on last evening. We heartily endorse every move made. Citizens of Lindale. And there would be still another lynching 3 years after that, in 1912. Well, that's the talk I gave to the Historical Society in 2008. 2 years later, a relative of Wally Stewart emailed me from Colorado. She had grown up hearing a slightly different story. She said, "I have the oral history passed down from John Stewart to the nephew he raised as his own, Joe W. Copeland. John Stewart not only admitted to leading the lynch mob, but as you suspected, being the first to shoot Willis Jones in his jail cell. It was said that John offered to cancel the debts owed to his father for his strawberry crops for any man who would ride with him to Tyler so he could kill Willis Jones. Stewart was proud to have avenged his father's death, and the gun he used to kill Willis was handed down to Joe Copeland when John died. John would brag about the hole the size of a silver dollar which he put in Willis Jones's chest. Joe Copeland kept the gun until the 1980s when he finally sold it, a move he later regretted. John said that Willis Jones was an outlaw, cattle thief, sold moonshine, and always carried a pistol. Effie not only worked for Willis Jones by running errands in return for room and board, but was also adopted by him. Willis sent Effie with poison to the Stewart home to request a job where he could get close enough to poison his water. When William turned him down, he went back again and offered to work for room and board only. Effie was turned away again with a message for Willis not to send Effie back again. Willis would not give up and sent Effie back for a third time on the night of May 19, 1897. Effie posed as Rice Price, a black man who worked for J.W. Ogburn, and went back to the Stewarts, where he was met at the door by William's wife, Genia. Effie introduced himself as Price Rice and said that Joe Ogburn needed to see her husband. She told Effie that Mr. Stewart had bad eyesight and he could not make it all the way to Joe Ogburn's by himself at night. Effie assured her that he would see Mr. Stewart both to and from Ogburn's himself, and Mrs. Student warily agreed. Effie's disguise must have been enough to fool William, as he left his home and headed to Ogburn's. On the way there, they approached the railroad, when Effie hit William on the back of the head with a cherry round, and I'm not sure what that is, and left him for dead. The blow didn't kill William right away, as he was able to crawl most of the way home. He was found and taken home by a group of people headed home from church. One of those people happened to be his sister-in-law, Martha Starr Maddie Ogburn Williams. William Riley Stewart died that night from his head injury. Effie Jones was arrested the next day, and John Stewart showed up and questioned him. Effie confessed and said that Willis Jones ordered him to do it for the insurance money. On the day of William's funeral, Willis Jones turned up at the Stewart home and vowed to find the person responsible for the murder. Little did he know that John Stewart and the sheriff had arranged to arrest Jones with the help of J.W. Ogburn. Jones was taken to Tyler jail, where Effie was already being held for the murder of William Riley Stewart. It was then that John Stewart put together his lynch mob and warned the sheriff he was going to storm the jail and get Jones. The sheriff was said to have told John that he wouldn't help him get at Jones, but he wouldn't stop them because he didn't want to get killed. Willis was shot and killed in his Tyler jail cell by John Stewart, several relatives, and very prominent Lindale residents in retribution for the murder of his father, William Riley Stewart. Charges against him and the others charged for murdering Willis Jones were eventually dropped. So did Willis Jones really arrange for the murder of William Riley Stewart? As the judge said, it never went to trial, so we'll never know. That's just one of the many problems with lynching.